call this special meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council to order. Today's January 7th, 2020. We'll do our Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman.
Here.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Councilmember Harmon.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Sned.
Here.
And Mayor Maria.
Here. Thank you. Mr. Casey, are there changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Mayor, there's one change on a consent item. It's item number 7, the approval of administrative items related to community choice energy. There's just some administrative cleanup we need to do in the formal recommendations, so we'll just pull this item and then bring it back next week.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you're out of order, sir. You need to sit down.
I signed up to put a public comment.
We're going to go to public comment next for the benefit of the public. So public comment is the opportunity for the public to speak to us on items that are not on our agenda. So we can't really get into a conversation with you. Holly Perea is here in the room. She'll make an appointment if you want to meet one of us, or she'll help you get answers from staff. So Mark Marshall Wofford, you're first. You'll be followed by Reverend Michael Corrigan, Chris Barros, Phil Walker. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, Madam Mayor and City Council members. My name's Mark Marshall Wofford, and I was reading on the building up the street. It says that law is the voice of the people. Justice makes it heard. Well, and then there comes injustice, and that's where I come in sometimes. I had an episode or two with these hospitals, and I made the mistake of saying the same thing someone said earlier about when it's all said and done. Well, I made the mistake of saying that at CMH, and I thought I'd missed the fireworks. I got out about 2 a.m. this would be the 5th of July, riding home, and they made me pay for my own cab. We were getting down the road, and some man came out of Turning Point with a skateboard and tried to bash out the windshield. The cab driver turned around and looked at me, and she says, "What do you think I should do?" So if you don't know by now, I don't know what to tell you, young lady. Just get me home, please. Anyway, things got worse and worse, but I don't want to go there. I just want to let you guys know that I am very, very fortunate to have my life at this point after what I've been through. And by God, I want to thank each and every one of you, and I have the utmost respect for each and every one of you for how you've had to endure and what you've done to get to your positions. Furthermore, we do need crosswalks up by the City College West Campus area. There's a 2-mile stretch, and we need to work on that soon as possible. I know winter's coming to an end here soon. Maybe we can get some work done. No. Thank you all, and have a blessed day. Thanks again.
Thanks. The Reverend Corrigan, are you here? There. Welcome.
Madam Mayor and City Council, first, let me send my congratulations to the new members who have made a commitment to this service. I think I and all of us thank you for that. I returned to the Council to revisit an issue that I and a number of our neighbors have previously asked for your assistance with. Our neighbor, Greg Petronic, has received permits to build 2 ADUs on properties that he owns at the end of Ariba Way, a narrow cul-de-sac, an obvious high fire risk area. The proposed structures involve 2 massive buildings that would almost certainly not have met design review standards had that been required. The projects were approved by the Building and Safety Department despite multiple irregularities and several outright misrepresentations in the permitting process. And following neighbor complaints, the city attorney has filed 14 charges against the owner. And now, 6 months later, Mr. Petronic has managed to delay even being arraigned. Yet all this time, our building department has allowed him to continue to move forward to ultimately build these structures. Last year, neighbors filed a civil lawsuit seeking revocation of these permits, and Mr. Petronic's lawyers asked the court to stay discovery pending resolution of the criminal case. He argued that nothing would happen until the criminal matter was settled. Only recently have we learned how wrong she was and we were. Now, only after having sought responses from the city attorney in writing has it been confirmed that, one, the city has not and will not suspend the review process pending resolution of the criminal case. Two, despite clear code violations or code provisions that permit building permits to be revoked, the current city policy is to never pursue revocation out of fear of adverse litigation. I'm told this comes from a failed lawsuit 8 years ago. And three, the maximum penalty that Mr. Petronic might incur for violating all of these permits is about $15,000, a drop in the bucket when compared to both the cost of the enforcement action and the potential value of the structures he could create. We ask that the council review the current penalty schedules and revise penalties so that there's enough of a teeth in these things to make a meaningful difference. We also ask you to build a policy for revoking building permits. We understand that there's a risk to litigation, but there has to be a way to distinguish between legitimate mistakes, which occur with honest people, and outright lies and frauds, which we think are the case here. Thank you very much.
Very good. Ms. Barros, Chris Barros, she left. Phil Walker. You'll be followed by Clint Orr and Rennie Dean Strong. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and newly minted members of the City Council. Congratulations. You stepped into a seat of, I would say, extreme responsibility, and thank you for it. I'd like to give a shout out to City Parks Department, Street Tree Maintenance Division. You know, there was quite a wind event overnight, Sunday evening into Monday morning a little bit, and I expected to walk out to the end of the driveway and see a big mess of leaves, Mexican fallen, stripped off the trees, Mexican fan palms. Just, it was a fairly intense Montecito Hills easterly wind that sort of worked those 75, 85, 90-foot tall trees, and a lot of fronds came down, but it was amazing. The street tree department, it's almost like they had a directional locator, and they got in, and even before I got out at 9 in the morning, everything was cleaned up. So I give them a big shout out to City Street Tree maintenance crew. Thank you very much.
All right, good news. Mr. Orr, your turn. You'll be followed by Mr. Strong, Michael Baker, Ellen Gallegos. Okay.
Mayor Murillo and council members, I'm Clint Orr, and I'm from Santa Barbara 93105 and 93108. And I'm happy to see a stable 7 now, you know, because that's good for, I think, progress with the city. I have opened the Coast Village Nonprofit Center, and I'm representing 7 nonprofits at this time. So it's the 7 nonprofits that I'll be hosting. Number 1 is the Santa Barbara Livestock Firebreak. I'm going to look for nonprofit funds to actually buy cattle and get behind these hills and remove the fuel. So nonprofit operation, no tax dollar. We'll bring in people that can remove the fuel and animals, and we'll have fire crews just like on this side, but they're paid by nonprofits. So we're going to remove the fuel so we won't see fires as much, and the pollution will be less. Number 2 is the California Country Dance Foundation. I've been working on that I opened that in 2011. I'm looking at dance hall availability in Santa Barbara County. In particular, I'm looking at the airport honky tonk, which would be at the old movie theater and would be a big draw for the airport and for the Amtrak. Number 3, the Santa Barbara Poverty Prevention Program. Get working families into home ownership. I'll get you the details on that one. As I said before, the Santa Barbara Pollution Prevention Program, Lease some street cleaners, eliminate leaf blowers. We got plenty of water. Let's just use hoses and stop the noise and the stuff in the eyeballs. The Clark Estate, very interested in that. The Coast Village Nonprofit Center hosts car auctions, art auctions, dances, etc. Number 6, the California Rangeland Trust. So I'm looking at putting large parcels into a trust for cattle and for things like that. And the 7th one is a Santa Barbara Greenhouse Trust. So it's a nonprofit. We're going to get a new board of directors, and we're going to buy greenhouses and prohibit them from cannabis. So just be roses and whatever it is necessary, and we'll do long-term leases on problem grows. Not that I don't smoke a little here and there, but the point is that the Greenhouse Trust will have provisions to where it'll prohibit cannabis in the get a little bit of a buffer zone is what I'd say. Okay, well, anyway, I'm going to get you like a 50-page presentation. I don't have 10 of them, but I'll get it to you next week, and you can look at it and pass it around or something. But and I'll continue to chat about it and get it out in the news press too.
50's a lot
Thank
of
you.
pages, Mr. Orr.
That's why I can't get 10 of
Okay.
them full color.
All right. Mr. Strong.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Congratulations, Ms. Alejandra, Mr. Jordan. This is my 23rd time speaking in front of Mayor Councils, as you know. I wish we could actually look at each other here, because this is, as of January 1st, as you know, I speak up about climate geoengineering, cloud seeding. That's supposed to bring rain, but Operation Mockingbird, faux media, fake media, whatever you want to call it, Operation Mockingbird, does not, all they did is show what cloud seeding was supposed to be, and that was a stand that was shooting out fog type whatever, and not showing about actually cloud seeding spraying out from Air Force bases, Vandenberg, Edwards, and down south, of course, and even on the island of Channel Islands here. But so we get a nice bombardment of climate geoengineering. So since 2005, when supposedly the public knew about cloud seeding, why are we still cloud seeding when there's no rain after they cloud seed our skies and create these serious quote unquote clouds that are man-made? So why are we still on Operation Mockingbird fake media, faux media, not talking about this? That there are geoengineered skies today that are bringing clouds, but there's no rain coming. So why is that not being discussed? I forget the gentleman with the mustache, trying to keep up with the people I speak to. So he goes, that's my job. That's not his job to speak up about that. So just let you know, those that are watching right now, and those that are the constituents here, we have a business as usual. We have the major gentrification going on, cutting trees, build, and push the glyphosate Roundup still being sold on the shelves. And everybody stay quiet, unless they hide behind their computers and don't show up, because this is the big thing that needs to happen for them to fill up this room. And actually, like right now, I'd rather be quiet and actually hear about how you guys are going to protect us. How are you not going to allow this to happen? So you guys, you have your, you guys have your work cut out for you. And, I'm thus far, this 5G technology, all proud of putting the roundabout on Cliff Drive in Las Positas, but they don't talk about the 5G tower. Are you proud of that? Millimeter microwave energy? This is what we're talking about, you guys. And this, again, 23rd time. And, I asked General Peter Pace, 5-star general, taking care of Donald Trump. But again, you guys need to help.
Mr. Strong, your time is up. Thank you for making your comments.
ONE 805.
Mr. Baker's turn.
First response.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Michael Baker, CEO for United Boys and Girls Clubs. I do want to. I was going to speak during the transition. And I did want to point something out that I think is just absolutely amazing as a history major. That we should never take for granted that we have a transition of power go as peacefully as it happens here today. There's so many parts of the world where this doesn't happen. So we should always remember that. But that's the history major in me. Sorry for that. But I did want to thank each and every one of you for your continued support and welcome aboard to new council members. You're going to see me on a regular basis. You'll probably get tired of seeing me. But at the end of the day, I'm hoping to get both of you into one of our facilities so you can see what we're doing on a daily basis for the kids that come here to Santa Barbara. And if you have any doubts of the success of the Boys and Girls Clubs, you just need look no further than all the way to your left to your council member, Oscar Gutierrez, who grew up at the West Side Club. And we are so proud of you. And I can't tell you what it means to me as the CEO of the organization to be able to bring kids here and point to them and say, this is what you can do someday. So again, thank you all for what you continue to do. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Gallegos, Jeff Schaefer after you, and then Rita McGann is our last speaker, and I won't be taking any more slips. Go ahead, please.
Madam Mayor, City Council, thank you for this opportunity. Congratulations, you guys, and Happy New Year. A new 3-story structure that is 30 feet by 50 feet and 50 feet tall will house a 600 square foot ADU. Just one of 2 towers, one door apart, that Greg Petronic is going to build. We found out that Greg continues to swiftly work with the building department as we discovered over 50 activity entries and department approvals in the permit case histories since July. We were wrongly told that no work would be done during the ongoing criminal case. We were wrongly told that stop work orders would not be lifted during the criminal case. We now are being informed that the criminal case is only punitive and the permits are separate, and that Greg can complete those structures even if the criminal case is still ongoing. The criminal case will at minimal fine Greg thousands, and at what taxpayer cost? We should instead be putting those tax dollars behind acting on what is clear grounds for revocation. The building code states a building permit application is a serious matter, the approval of which is subject to revocation by the building official whenever the permit is issued in reliance on incorrect information or in violation of any ordinance or regulation or any of the provisions of the codes. We have to ask ourselves, are we going to allow these ADUs to be built even after soils and grading numbers were missing or grossly incorrect, even after Greg refusals of site visits, even after Greg signs government covenants under penalty of perjury that his primary residence was both at 2919 and 2924 Ariba Way, even after Greg and workers trespass on private property to secretly dig for core soil samples, even after Greg continues to work during stop work orders, even after Greg continues to work on 2019 to complete the garage conversions on the ADU permit and successfully re-rent it, even after citizens come to council and say that Ariba Way is an undersized street and cul-de-sac and parking is already non-existent. Note, Greg already has 11 cars associated to 2924 Ariba Way. We assume that we'll get 8 to 10 cars after all of this is done, in addition. Even after we performed emergency services turnaround tests on Ariba Way that proved the best case scenario, it takes 2.35 minutes for fire and over 1 minute for an ambulance to turn around. Even after City Council said that approving ADUs in high fire zones would be a threat to public health and safety because it would bring more traffic and congestion to a part of Santa Barbara that has narrow roads and limited parking. Please remove these threats that we face on Ariba Way. Set a precedent that bad actors and repeated incorrect information across multiple permits are revocable, and builders could be forced to start over. Follow our own building
Thank
codes
you for your comments.
and
Your time is
protect
up.
us.
Jeff
Thank
Schaefer.
you.
And are you coming up together? You look like a team there. Great. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Congratulations on the new members. My name is Jeff Schaefer, and I think you know who I am based on the work we've done within homelessness for a lot of years, working primarily with a chronically homeless population, not just in Santa Barbara City, but throughout the whole county. I don't want to speak to you about that population today. today is this month is Human Trafficking and Sexual Exploitation Awareness Month. So both of us want to speak to you about that briefly, because one of our goals is to bring awareness to the whole community about that issue. So I wanted to let you know that in 2014, we joined the Human Trafficking Task Force to be a member of the task force and to work alongside them to assist survivors. It's our understanding that there are 150 to 200 survivors of human trafficking, sexual exploitation that are citizens of our county, which means it's not just an international issue, it's our own local young women and young men that are being exploited. And it's also a big part of the LGBTQ community to be aware of as well, the most vulnerable populations. And what I've learned through, even though I don't have direct contact with survivors, what I've learned through partners such as Victim Witness and other partners is that this is truly the most vulnerable population we probably have in our city, these young people that are being exploited. So this is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. I just wanted to invite you all as city council members and members of the public. We're going to be having a Vigil for Freedom on Friday, January 17th at 5:30, just outside at the De La Guerra Plaza. I would invite you all to be a part of that. It'll be a really an hour-long service to remember and bring up the needs of survivors and to have some silence for them, and also to recruit more partners to actually assist. So I'd also be very interested if there are any city council members that have a specific interest in this issue and want to learn more about it, can set up an individual meeting for you at any time to come in and talk about what we're doing and figure out how, as a city, you can get involved. And members of the public can always email me at jeff@sbact.org to get more information. We want to involve everyone. We need everyone at the table for this issue to help survivors. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. I'm Rita McGaw. I work at the District Attorney's Office and Victim Witness, and I'm our task force coordinator countywide. And we just wanted to give a brief update, sort of where we are with the task force, and give you a few numbers over the past couple of years. The Santa Barbara County Human Trafficking Task Force is co-led by the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office and Santa Barbara County District Attorney's Office. We want to assess the problem locally, offer access to training opportunities, develop protocols, and improve law enforcement and victim service response. And to that end, on the victim service side, we work with multiple agencies throughout the county, nonprofit agencies like SB Act, to that end, and nonprofit and faith-based organizations as well. We have state and federal partners, FBI and HSI partners that we work with as well on proactive operations. And together we're dedicated to a victim-centered approach to combat the commercial sexual exploitation and labor trafficking of human beings. So just to give you a little idea of where we're at, between January 2017 and June of 2019, Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office, with assistance from other law enforcement agencies such as Santa Barbara PD, Santa Maria PD, to name a few, engaged in 119 human trafficking investigations, 105 sex trafficking related, and 8 labor trafficking related. This resulted in 36 prosecutions related to human trafficking for 2017 through 2019. And that doesn't count cases that are pending now. In addition to the number of confirmed exploiters for human trafficking, 71 individuals were cited and arrested for solicitation of prostitution. Through the Office for Victims of Crime, which is how Victim Witness primarily serves victims of crime, they manage the largest amount of federal funding. We served from 2017 through 2019, 129 survivors, and of that, 4,389 units of service to victims. And I can tell you that number is drastically low, because I know that I'm not the only one that forgets to input all the services that we provide. It is very labor intensive, as probably some of you know, and a little chaotic. So anyway, that's just a brief update, and we thank you, and thank you, Mayor. I know you are involved, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. When is your event again? Can you repeat that?
The 17th?
Yeah, Friday 17th at 5:30, just outside here.
Right here in De La Guerra Plaza. Thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So that closes our public comment period, and we'll go to the consent calendar. Madam Clerk, are there items to read?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Item 1, adoption of an ordinance to amend city agreement number 26351 with Beachcomber Santa Barbara LLC. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving and authorizing the Parks and Recreation Director to execute an amended and restated lease for a portion of the Cabrillo Pavilion. Item 2, adoption of an ordinance authorizing a Railway Express Agency building lease with Wheel Fund Rentals Santa Barbara, Inc. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving and authorizing execution of a 5-year lease agreement with Wheel Fund Rentals Santa Barbara, Inc. for a space at the Railway Express Agency building located at 215 State Street at a rate of $3,000 per month. Item 3, resolution approving grant application for $310,000 in Senate Bill 2 Planning Grants Program funds. Recommendation of the council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara authorizing the filing of a grant application to update the General Plan Program Environmental Impact Report, PEIR, through the Senate Bill 2 Planning Grant Program administered by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And item 4, amend the position and salary control resolution for fiscal year 2020, affecting the allocation of a code enforcement officer in Environmental Services Division. Recommendation the council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending resolution number 19041, the position and salary control resolution for fiscal year 2020, affecting the allocation for code enforcement officer Environmental Services Division effective December 21, 2019.
Thank you. And item 7 has been postponed to next week. And if there's no further objection, we'll waive further reading. Mr.
Mayor,
Jordan?
I'd have a question on number 9, please.
Would you read item number 9?
Yes, item 9, agreement with the Novak Consulting Group for land development and construction permitting workflow and organizational study.
What is your question, Mr. Jordan?
So, welcome, Mr. Buell. So my question is generally just some more information on what the nuts and the bolts are of the study, in particular, whether it involves any gathering of stakeholder information as part of the process, and also whether it will specifically address dynamics at, say, Planning Commission or the Design Review Boards.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Jordan, welcome. I'm George Buell, Community Development Director. In response to your question, Councilmember Jordan, this really is an internal look at the operation of the community, or of the land development process within community development, public works, and the fire department, parks and recs as it relates to creeks. We will be engaging stakeholders, yes. So we'll be talking, I imagine, with architects, landowners, business owners, and what they're experienced people who have gone through the process multiple times and who can offer valuable insight as to what opportunities might exist for improvement. And from that, we would look to develop a plan for long-term operational change that will improve the process.
Right, and then your contract with the consultant, too, will specifically look at what I call the dynamics in the processes involved with advisory boards?
Yes, I apologize. I didn't address that. I imagine that there will be comments from stakeholders that speak to that, but really the purpose of this study and the implementation actions that we're looking for are things that staff can do with relative ease that do not require code changes. If there's opportunity for communication back to the boards and commissions that are involved in the land development process, we certainly will provide that. But the real force and effect of this study is to help us identify operational changes within our organization.
Right. Thanks so much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Very good. Ms. Sneddon, question on number 8.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Wait, she needs to read it. Did you read it? No, I don't think. Okay. 8, please.
Item 8, agreements for Hilda McIntyre Park, Franceschi Park, and Schofield Park resident caretakers.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Really just a comment that I believe it's in response to an email we received regarding Franceschi Park and some other constituent emails I've received, that I was hoping that in the future, maybe at the Parks Commission, we could have an update on the status of the plans for Franceschi Park. We haven't heard from them for a while. It's been about a year, and it was just a general request that we might get more of an update on the park itself at Parks Commission. That's all.
At Parks Commission. And I see Mr. Casey nodding his head, so thank you for that comment. And are you all able to vote for this consent calendar to go forward? Then I'll entertain a motion to move the calendar forward.
So moved.
Second.
That was Friedman, Harmon. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Consent calendar done. What's next, Ms. Clerk? Number 10. Number 10? No.
16.
Where are we?
Item 16, Madam Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
Item 16, appointment of Mayor Pro Tempore, Ordinance Committee, and Finance Committee.
Well, I will report that Councilmember Kristen Sneddon is next in line to be the Mayor Pro Tem, and she is willing to take that role. And the Ordinance Committee is made up of, well, Mr. Rouse left, so it's Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon and Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. And my understanding is that Councilmember Jordan wants to be on Ordinance. So if we're okay with that, that leaves to the Finance Committee Mr. Friedman, Ms. Harmon, and Ms. Gutierrez. And so we need to talk about who would chair those committees. And Mr. Friedman, you're the most senior person.
Yeah, I would like to chair the Finance Committee.
Are you okay with that, Ms. Harmon?
Absolutely.
Are you going to stage a coup? And
I'd like to move that Councilmember Friedman is Chair of Finance Committee. That's how we vote?
Very good. Okay, that's a great motion. And Chair of the Ordinance Committee by seniority would be Oscar Gutierrez. So would you incorporate that into your motion, Ms. Harmon?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
And are you willing to take on that responsibility?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Did you have a second to your motion? Second. A second from Ms. Sneddon?
Mr. Casey.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, maybe if we could just have a comprehensive motion that includes the Mayor Pro Tem, the memberships of the two committees and the chairs, and then you make all those official appointments.
So I think you would just say so moved.
So moved.
You good with that?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that was smooth-ish. And we move on to number 17, Ms. Clerk.
Item 17, 2019 new legislation report.
All right, who is taking the lead? Mr. Casey. What is this? Oh, Mr. Kalan.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, Happy New Year. We volunteered to focus the city's legislative effort into a report for a presentation to you today. And I say focus because many elements of the city are heavily involved. Map 4 from the city administrator's office really takes a point for the organization as a whole in developing the city's legislative platform. That platform, of course, tells us as staff and the community how you wish to interact with state and federal government on the bills that they are considering. So this is really the outcome of that legislative platform. Coming back to you. In front of you, you have two documents that are different than what's in your packet, and I want to explain why. The PowerPoint, the slides are the same, but they've been reordered to match the presentation order today. And in order to make it as streamlined as possible, we've grouped it by lawyer. You'll see in the front row, 5 of the 8 of us are here. Sarah Connect had a family emergency. Tom Shapiro is in trial, and Ms. Lewis is unavailable otherwise. So Mr. Henschke, Mr. Way, Mr. Doimus, Mr. Lusitana, and Ms. Ostranger, going right to left, will present. Next, can we get the slides started? Paul would, or Dan, would somebody click the? Sure. Thank you. It's there. There it is. There we go. All right, next slide, please. Who's got the clicker? John? Thank you. Okay. we're not going to talk a lot about attorney ethics, litigation, and governance, but they're at the front for a reason you'll see in the middle. Most of the presentation will be spent on items 4 and 5, land use and public safety. You'll see in the report that this year Governor Newsom dealt with signed about 900 bills, vetoed about 200. That's not a lot different than what Governor Brown did over his time. So the volume wasn't different, but the focus was. Next slide. Let's get right into it. Why do we care about attorney ethics? Next slide, please. This slide represents AB 242, which requires lawyers now to be trained on implicit bias. And as I listened to the welcoming remarks and introduction for the new council, the obvious theme in Santa Barbara is building strength through diversity. Many of you who know me know that I got my degree in biology 40 years ago, and I studied genetics, and we learned in the 70s that diversity was the key to strength in a gene pool, and it's certainly the same in an organization. The state bar is telling us that our implicit biases, whether we, whatever walk of life or ethnicity or other background we come from, our implicit biases have real and sometimes negative effects on real people. So I highlighted in red on this slide the idea that as we look at implicit biases as lawyers, we need to ask ourselves the hard questions about what our prejudices are, what are our biases. Are we brave enough to talk to our priest, reverend, friend, therapist about what we carry that we may not be able to articulate? Next slide, please. I'm not going to read any of this, but I would commend it to you later on. The state legislature here is making a very, very powerful policy statement that resonates to show that you'll see in number 5, black defendants, as an example, are sentenced much more harshly than others. The message coming from the legislature is that these aren't accidents. They're the result of the way we've built our society, and they're telling us that we have to do self-examination to work through it. Next slide. All right, civil litigation, next slide. What does this have to do with anything? SB 310 was unopposed by anyone in California, and it allows felons to serve on juries. Next slide, please. The Senate analysis is very instructive, and it quantified that African American men were 10 times more likely to wind up in prison than a white man, and Latino men were more than twice as likely as white men to wind up in jail. The whole point of a jury is to be judged, as you know, by a jury of your peers. That's hard to do when your peers are jailed at a disproportionate rate to others in society. So again, the legislature is telling us here that inclusivity and diversity is essential to fundamental fairness. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Doimus.
Welcome, Mr. Doimus.
Welcome, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. My name is John Doimus, an assistant city attorney here. The first bill I'd like to talk about is in line with racial diversity and inclusivity. AB 931, unlike the other bills that you have before you today, this bill becomes effective in 2030. The goal is that it applies first to cities with populations over 50,000, so that would include the city of Santa Barbara. The goal of it is to increase representation of women on local boards or commissions. It requires any boards or commissions that have more than 5 members to have at least no more than 60% of the same gender, and boards with 4 members or less cannot be the identical gender. The interesting thing in this law, it does not provide any guidance as to what if you have an applicant pool of one specific gender. That may be a problem. There's 10 years for this bill when it becomes enacted, so maybe that issue will be addressed.
SB 225 also deals with diversity and inclusiveness and calls for allowing people who are 18 and resident to be eligible regardless of their citizenship status or their immigration status. The problem with this bill is a conflict with our city charter and obviously presents a preemption issue. The preemption issue is that the charter only calls for qualified electors to serve on boards, commissions, or councils. So the bill also does not give any guidance on this issue, and so it could be an issue that may come to fruition later on through litigation or other means. And now I'll turn it over to the land use section of our presentation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council members. Greg Lusitana, Assistant City Attorney. I'll be presenting the first half of the land use litigation that's new for this year, and then followed by Ms. Ostringer for the second half. The first bill that I'll address is AB 101. It is actually a two-part bill. It talks about the first part being funding of $2.5 billion by the legislature to cities to encourage housing production, particularly focusing on homeless crisis and various incentives for affordable housing. The second part of the bill is a little bit different, but it's all part of the same bill, and it authorizes the state attorney general to prosecute cities in civil enforcement type proceedings where they'll impose civil penalties and so forth for any cities that do not have compliant housing elements. And the HCD, in fact, is empowered to post a list, an annual list of cities with non-compliant housing elements, and then leaving the option for the state attorney general to go ahead and try to create an enforcement action against those cities to get their housing elements compliant with state law. And again, it authorizes the Attorney General, to pursue the cities, to seek injunctive relief, to have a court impose civil penalties against cities that do not have compliant housing elements.
Mr. Lusitana, Mr. Friedman has a question, which I think is okay since this is an informational item. You can jump in if you have questions.
Thank you. That was my first question, is how we wanted to ask questions. Do you want to go as we go? I think it's easier as we go through the bills. So.
Well, I'm making notes of things I want to ask at the end, but it's how we want to handle it.
If you want to wait till the end, I can wait till the end too. It's up to...
I was giving you permission to go ahead.
Perfect. So on this bill, can you just define what it means to be compliant or non-compliant with a housing element?
With state law. And so, for example, when we had all the amendments that came down on ADUs and so forth, you have to be compliant with what the state requires to be in your housing elements.
And so it's not the production of the housing at the time?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's the compliance with the requirements of state law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Mr. Jordan, you have something at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Mayor, I just kind of have like an overarching on the two of you that are going to present, particularly on the housing items. If it'd be appropriate for you to also offer an opinion on what's really enforceable, what we're not going to worry about, what we're going to let the state chase us for. There's a few dates in there that are like a week ago, and some of them are taken care of by the emergency ordinance, but some of them aren't.
Right.
And there's a lot of we have tos, but I don't really get a sense of whether we really have to or if we're just going to kind of wait it out.
I'll be glad to. My understanding is the city's current housing element is compliant with state law, so we're fine. Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, the next bill is...
And let me interrupt for a second. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Jordan, we're going to need your help in prioritizing those. We all have a lot of ideas on how to react to the various bills. I think it's really crucial that rather than the lawyers trying to figure that out, we do it in a strategic way with community development and the Council and Planning Commission, because it's going to be impossible to complete everything. So we're forced into being strategic.
Okay.
Good. Please continue.
Sure. The next bill is AB 139. It focuses primarily on emergency shelters. There's a strong effort by the legislature to get protections in emergency shelters for homeless and so forth, clarifies what a emergency shelter zone shall be. It's going to require that housing elements have zones that specifically allow for emergency shelters. You have to have them of sufficient capacity, and there's a formula in the law that defines what sufficient capacity for emergency shelters is. It's the point-in-time survey and then the arena and so forth. It's all in the bill. It also requires that the HCD or COG include housing needs of individuals and develop a methodology to allocate emergency shelters in various cities. And the cities themselves will also be required to review their housing element goals to see if the emergency shelters, what the needs are, and if the needs are being met in the community. Okay. Next is AB 68. This is the first of 4 laws that came down that address accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. So I'm putting them all together. AB 68 in particular is the law that eliminates minimum lot size requirements for ADUs. ADUs have a minimum size themselves of 800 square feet, have to be at least 16 feet in height, and they now have 4 foot rather than the more standard 5 foot setbacks for rear and side yards.
Ms. Sneddon has a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. Oh,
AB 671, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
I did on that one, sorry.
Sure.
Just a clarification. So is at least 16 feet in height?
Yes.
Is that 2 stories?
Yes.
So any new ADU for those not in the emergency ordinance that we're talking about,
Right.
In those danger areas, but every place else that's in compliant with state laws has to be at least 2 stories?
Can't be smaller than by direction of the city. Has to have a minimum height of 16 feet allowed by the city. You're not compelled to build a 16-foot structure.
Right.
Thank you for
Right.
that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have other lights, Mr. Friedman?
In regards to the 800 square foot minimum,
Right.
does that mean that you can't build ADU of 750 square feet or 700, or is it kind of similar to what you just mentioned?
Similar to what city attorney mentioned.
Okay, so the property owner could build lower if they so chose, but we couldn't require as a city to build less.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I'll move on to the next one. AB 671, again involving ADUs. This is a bill that requires the local agency to include a plan within their housing element, listing the existing plans that incentivize and promotes the creations of the ADUs. That has to start being put into your housing element. And it also requires the HCD to develop a list that for publication starting the end of this year of existing state grants and financial incentives for operating and in connection with the planning of ADUs. Next is AB 881, also on ADUs. This one requires that, again, it's the owner occupancy requirement. You do not have to live in the main house or in the ADU on the property. That's no longer required. Also, local agencies are to ministerially approve ADUs on multifamily residences, and it also has a definition of a public transit area for use in the state law.
Mr. Friedman, go ahead.
Yeah.
So this gets to an issue, we've discussed it before, but when we have new council members, there's the period from early of mid 2018 through 2019 where we required owner occupancy covenants on ADUs, and now with this here, the state law saying you can't require it. What do we do with those who went through the process during that brief time when there are covenants on there? Can they remove them, or what? Or how do we, basically my question is, I think it gets to an equity issue or fairness issue of those who went through that process in those 18 months.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, we're working on a clear, brief advisory memo to put it to planning and building and safety counter so that the public will know the circumstances. The law does not, in its current form, require the elimination of those covenants. The council could change that if you would like, and there are many reasons. You can do it for any number of reasons. As of now, I don't believe we as staff have authority to cause those covenants to be removed unless the ADU is eliminated from the property. Again, the council could change that, and you will have a legislative opportunity pretty soon because we will be bringing back the permanent ADU regulations relatively quickly during the period that your current interim regulations are in effect.
So when that comes back to us, we could have, as part of that discussion, we could address this, and if there was some direction from council to address this issue, we could do it then, whether we wanted to just maintain the current system or if we wanted to say, hey, let's have a process for them to remove those could be addressed at that time.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Sneddon, a question from you?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For that second bullet point, does the city have discretion over what is ministerially approved, or is that ministerial approval for whatever the state law?
You said the second bullet point or the first one? The ministerially approved?
The ministerial approval, the second bullet point there.
Okay. Requires them to ministerially approve the ADUs on lots with multifamily. That's a provision in the state law that asks for an expedited review of those types of ADUs applications.
Will the city have discretion over what's on that ministerial checklist, or is that state law checklist? Or do we know yet?
We know that the state law says a local ordinance shall include all of the following, and there are a number of development standards, if you will, size and shape, setback kinds of rules. There are places where there's some flexibility in the law. We are going to explore those with you. I'd be making a mistake to try and catalog them now.
Yes, just conceptually.
But the idea here behind this law is fast and plentiful construction of accessory dwelling units.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay. And then the last of the four involving ADUs is SB 13. It prohibits cities from imposing impact fees on ADUs. And again, there was a reflection of the legislature's belief that cities are inhibiting the development of ADUs, and they want to get the development going and accelerate that process. After that, we have non-ADU related amendments or legislation. One is SB 99. It's a land use / public safety issue. It basically says that on the safety element portion of the housing element, starting this year, for residential developments within hazard areas, whether it be fire hazard or mudslide areas and so forth, they have to show on the safety element at least 2 emergency evacuation routes for people to evacuate in case of a fire or mudslide. And that's required to be put into the safety element of the housing element. And then finally, we have AB 377. That's the micro enterprise home kitchen operations, or the acronym being MECOs. What is that? The council member Stin says. It is an effort by Assemblyman Garcia for the last year. What they want to do is they want to have private enterprise home kitchens where in residential areas, someone who wants to be able to sell some of their food to the public and make some money, they can do that. It's limited to gross sales of $50,000 or less. And it's an idea to diversify and to allow some free enterprise at the local level. What this bill does is authorizes the cities to go ahead and authorize MECOs in their jurisdiction if they so desire. And if there's not any other questions, I'll pass it
Can
on
you go
to
back
Ms.
to
Ostringer.
slide 20? I think you missed a bullet, or maybe I wasn't listening. Did you talk about when replacement parking, that bottom one? 20?
You're right. I did miss that. That is also another aspect of, there it is, SB 13. We can no longer require replacement parking
Okay.
on the
Mr.
approval of ADUs.
Mr. Friedman, you had some.
On the home kitchens,
Yes.
just from the bill analysis you gave us, it notes that if a county adopts this, then that automatically adopts for the cities.
Yeah.
If I read that correctly.
This bill was being fought over by cities and counties and so forth for the last year. It really was a jurisdictional argument. When it first came down about a year ago, they just wanted to impose it as a state rule and use the counties. The counties, of course, they're the ones that have the public health review to see that food is not adulterated and that the cooking equipment is inspected and all that kind of thing. And the counties had a problem with just imposing this MECO legislation. And then the cities came on board and said, well, no, now you're not letting the cities have input. What about code enforcement issues? Are you going to allow for signage? Are you going to have parking problems with people coming to pick up this home cooked food that they're going to be selling? So it took a while. And so what the compromise apparently was that came down was cities on their own can go ahead and authorize it. And that's what I've reported to you. You can authorize a MECO operation. If the county decides to operate it, that authorization is not restricted to just the unincorporated areas. If the county goes ahead and authorizes it, the county and all the cities within the county are also authorized to allow MECOs.
So this gives another couple of questions. If the county authorizes it, then it would come to us. But so do we know if the county is moving forward?
I do not know. I do not know. It would probably, my guess would be some kind of a cooperative agreement with the county, because after all, the county has the public health side of things, but then the city's concerned about code enforcement and parking and signage and traffic and all that kind of stuff. So if something was to come to fruition, I would assume there'd be some kind of a joint agreement between the county and the city if the city would, wanted to go ahead and implement that.
Okay, that kind of gets to my next question, is if we implemented one and the county and ours was more strict than theirs, if we had different ones, but it seems like we could probably work with them to get a uniform one. My concern would be if they're different, which one supersedes the other? If the county implements one and we implement a different one. So maybe that's something we can look into to make sure that as this goes forward, because I think it will. I think this has been in the works for a while.
Sure.
Perhaps we could have just one ordinance rather than multiple ones.
Well, the standard itself, the standards of what the operations are supposed to be like are in AB 377. So how it's implemented, you follow the guidelines of AB 377. And they talk about, the cooking and the cleaning and all that kind of stuff. It's actually revising the health and safety code because it's a food issue, not necessarily a land use issue.
Okay. So I'll just say, Mr. Kay, it might be good to kind of reach out to the county on this one and see where they're at and make sure we get this right as it goes forward. So thank you.
Okay. I'll now pass it over to Ms. Ostringer for the second half of the land use.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mayor Murillo, council members. I'm just going to jump right in. This SB 234 regulates large family daycare homes. Prior to the passing of SB 234, the city and counties were able to require large family daycares, which are daycares in residential homes that supervise between 9 and 14 children, to acquire a use permit prior to operation. Now the legislature has declared that these large family daycare centers are residential use by right, which means that we cannot require a permit for them, and they'll be solely regulated by the state. This is going to require a quick and fairly simple zoning amendment to remove the permit requirement from Title 30. There's two assembly bills that address surplus housing, or excuse me, surplus land. AB 1486 requires that local agencies include specific information about their surplus land and how they plan on disposing of it within both their housing element and their annual progress report that we do to the state's housing and community development. It also requires the HCD, or Housing and Community Development, to make this information available within a database. Additionally, if a local agency is intending to dispose of surplus land for the purpose of adopting or developing low or moderate income units, it needs to do what's called a notice of availability, which is a written notice that goes out to housing sponsors who have let the HCD know that they're interested in surplus land. There's a typo, it's actually AB 1255, I apologize. This is somewhat of its partner, and this is what requires a city to make a central inventory of all of our surplus land that we've identified before December 31st of each year. We then are required to report that information to the HCD. And by April 1st, our first reporting period for this will be April 1st of 2021, so we're in that period now. And
we have a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What constitutes surplus land?
It's land that the agency has determined by a public hearing that it no longer needs, is not necessary for its operation. These bills, there's also surplus residential land, which is not part of this. So it would be all residential. This is not residential surplus land.
Do we at this time have an inventory of surplus land? Not asking what the number is, or is that something?
Prior to this, only counties were required to report. I don't know if we would have a...
So this is new for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the reporting, whether, and I don't know that we've had any surplus land, public hearings for surplus land.
Mr. Henschke, thank you.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, at this time, I don't believe that the city has any surplus land that would qualify. It's something that would be run out of our real property department, but in discussing this with the Public Works Director, we don't believe that there's any surplus land that would fit within these categories. Additionally, as you recall, to the extent that we do have surplus land that was dedicated for parks or public utility purposes, there are charter restrictions that also apply to the disposal of that property.
Thank you. That matches more my perception of our surplus.
So it's a law that's really applying to other counties and cities, not where our real estate values are so high here? Is that the assumption?
We just use all our property.
Yeah.
We use our property. Darn it. Okay. Go ahead, please.
So this is a rather straightforward bill. It's really all about transparency and ease of public access to our information. It just requires us to post on our website all of our fees, our exactions, our affordability requirements, including ordinances. It's just really a place that the public can go to get the information that it needs in an easy, simple place. So AB 1485 is an amendment to Senate Bill 35, which, if you may recall, was passed in 2018. And what Senate Bill 2035 did was it created a ministerial approval process for certain multi-housing developments. And it was an expedited process. This amends it to the extent that if the cities are not meeting their moderate RENA numbers, that a streamlined process could be applied. Additionally, it also applies to some amendments to the Bay Area, but that's not really relevant here. But what I thought was most significant and what I wanted to bring to the council's attention on this is that it clarifies that SB 35 projects are subject to the legal protections that are afforded under the Housing Accountability Act. So what that means is if a court were to find that the city improperly failed to approve ministerially one of these SB 35 projects, we would be required to reimburse for attorney's fees and costs, and there's a potential that we could also be subject to civil penalties. AB 1763 is amendment to the state's density bonus law. It's intended to promote and encourage the development and production of purely 100% affordable projects with the maximum density allowed. So it allows for a 100% project, it can have a minimum 80% lower income and up to 20% at a moderate income to qualify for this 100% affordability. If it does qualify and meet this requirement, it's entitled to an 80% density bonus increase and 4 concessions under the law. It's important to note that if one of these 100% affordable projects is within a half mile of a major transit stop, that it will also be entitled to a height increase of an additional 3 stories or 33 feet, and the city can't impose any maximum density restrictions on the project. The major transit stop is defined as a railway or the intersection of 2 or more major bus routes with service intervals at approximately at least 15 minutes during the major commute hours, morning and evening.
Question, Mr. Friedman?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. So on the 33 feet, when we are with our AUD, there's the 45-foot height that we have, and we're considering going up to 47. And then if you have a special community benefit, we can go up to 60. So does that mean if it goes up to 47 or in some cases 60 that you could have a 93-foot building, or how does that 33-foot get applied?
That is a concern, and we have a charter provision that puts us at 60 feet. So that's something the voters have decided they wanted. I think that would be up to us if we wanted to fight that. The state has indicated that this is a matter of statewide concern that would preempt us from having different regulations and laws, but I think in that case you could move forward.
And Madam Mayor and Councilmember Friedman, I think there's an approach to be taken here. Home rule is critical, and I've gotten comments from the public wanting to make sure that we looked at these state laws in connection with city charter power. There will come a point where we have to start closely scrutinizing the legislature's findings of statewide concern. Putting it very, very simply, the charter gives Santa Barbara absolute control over municipal affairs. The state can preempt the city's power when there's a matter of statewide concern. So you saw, for example, in the Voting Rights Act, the legislature, because voting's a fundamental right, found a statewide concern in assuring that minority voters' votes were counted as completely as non-minority voters. Then you'll recall we talked about SB 415, even year elections. And that was a harder question of whether there was some statewide concern. There will come a point on these land use bills where we will say this is questionable preemption, but you will make the policy decision of whether we're going to fight or switch. Some of these may be objectives you want to accomplish, even though the state is forcing it on the city. So this is a long way of saying we're going to have to ask you case by case whether you want to switch or fight.
Thank you. This one in particular concerns me because we had a lot of the public that was concerned about us raising from 45 to 47. And now we're talking about another 33 feet. So just kind of mark this one. This one is very concerning to me, perhaps more than any of the bills that were raised here. I do have another question. It goes to something you said, Ms. Ostringer, that if it's the 100% affordable, it allows for an 80% bonus density. I want to make sure I understand what that means. And then again, in regards to our AUD ordinance, if it's, say the high density is 62 per acre, is it that there's another 80% on top of that?
Correct.
Okay. That answers that question. Thank you.
Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. But you also mentioned in there, too, the concessions, which aren't in the verbiage there, but currently it's 2, and it would double them to 4?
Well, the concessions also depend on, I'm sorry, Mayor Murillo and Councilmember Jordan. The number of concessions also depends on the number of affordability.
Okay.
But yeah, it's going to go to 4.
Yeah. And so I just start Councilmember Friedman's hysteria, too. If that's a given, because you drew a circle around your MTD bus station to get the extra 33 feet, you could also ask as one of your concessions more height, right? In theory.
Well, I don't think that you could request more, particularly if it was going to go above
The 33?
The 33,
Okay.
or we have in certain areas 45 feet, so.
Yeah. Mr. Cologne, so each one of these, I'm taking what you're saying is somebody won't go up and stop this on a global basis. Each one of these is going to take an individual city, a municipality, to challenge it according to their own situation.
Yes.
That's not good. Okay.
Ms. Snedden?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have 2 questions about this. So one, this is only the case if it meets this 100% affordable threshold?
That's correct. That's when it gets the extra density and the extra concessions.
So that's if that's true and it's near a major transit stop, then you get the extra 3 stories.
Yes, if it's not 1.5 mile from a transit stop, you still get your 80% density bonus and your 4 concessions, but you wouldn't get the additional height or the restriction, the limitation that the city at that point then could not even restrict the maximum density.
Mm-hmm. Well, I share my colleague's concern that this is maybe one of the more alarming new developments. I'm thinking not just of our city, but of small towns like Napa, where you have one major transit road, and now suddenly that will have potentially 6-story buildings on it because it's a major transit lane. And I'm wondering if we do careful planning, if we don't end up fighting this and we do careful planning, how long those transit routes have to be established. Like, might we change where our transit routes go to drive the density where in careful city planning we would want it to be, or are we beholden to what our traditional transit routes are just at the moment that this is passed?
I don't recall, Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Snedden, I don't recall the law addressing that.
It does not.
If you're suggesting that we should become friendly with MTD, that's good advice.
That is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I can confirm that the law doesn't address whether
We
or not
are
you can
friendly
move.
with MTD.
In terms of routing, right now routes go where the density is, and if that is determining the further density of our city, and we might want to vision different areas where density is, we might want those routes to go to the areas where we're visioning density to be, rather than just put the density where the routes happen to be now. Just a consideration, not a decision point at this point, but I think this could very much change the fabric of our entire city, and I think it bears mentioning that. I share Councilmember Friedman's concern that this one in particular, because of these building heights.
And just to be clear and reiterate, this only applies to developments that are 100% affordable, with at least 80% being lower and then 20% moderate. So it's not all multifamily developments.
Which personally I'd love to see, 100% affordability. That I'd love to see. I just want to have some local control over where that goes, and that's my comment.
Well, my first question was, is there someone who wants to build something like that? Right, so.
Madam Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, if I might, to a degree, this problem is already in our hands with density bonuses anyway, because for explanation, the law calls for density bonus applicants receiving both, quote, incentives and, quote, concessions, and those might involve height now. So we are in a position where, case by case, if someone sought a density bonus, we would have only our ordinance to use to control how that played out. And we have had applications in the last 4 or 5 years that contemplated density bonuses. They haven't gone anywhere, but it's a real thing regardless of this bill.
Thank you.
The next bill addresses changes in existing law for supportive housing and the No Place Like Home funding programs. The changes to the supportive housing are not really significantly different from what we saw or have seen the year before, but there was some mention of CEQA as it pertains to the No Place Like Home funding programs, and the legislature has decided that there are certain No Place Like Home projects that may be exempt from CEQA. And also another significant change was that it clarified and determined that local agencies that make the decision to seek funding from the No Place Like Home program, that does not qualify as a project under CEQA. So now we're getting to the last topic, and it's 4 slides. SB 330, which is known as the Housing Crisis Act, is a really comprehensive piece of legislation. So I'll go through all the 4 slides. This is just a very broad brush overview of the bill. I gave a presentation at a lunch meeting to the Planning Commission, and I'd be happy to share that more extensive PowerPoint with any of you that are interested in it. What the Housing Crisis Act does is it amends the Housing Accountability Act and the Permit Streamlining Act and adds a government code section 66-300 with the purpose of that section maintaining density of counties and cities as it was January 1st of 2018. And how it does that is it prohibits counties and cities from imposing regulations, policies, amending codes, even voter initiatives that would reduce the intensity of a use on any parcel or parcels as it existed as of January 1st, 2018, unless that local agency concurrently adopts a policy, regulation, or ordinance that would increase the intensity of use of a different parcel or parcels such that there's no net loss of housing. And I think the note to take that it goes back to January 1st, 2018 regulations is that the author of this bill was Senator Skinner, the author of the no net loss housing. So I think this is somewhat of her way of making sure that the cities can't find a loophole to backtrack from the no net loss that was in place as of January 1st, 2018. With regards to the Housing Crisis Act, what is a reduction in intensity of use? It's very broadly defined. It would be any regulation or policy that would decrease height limitations, floor area ratio requirements, density requirements. It even addresses the fact that we can't increase setbacks. So that anything that's going to reduce a parcel's ability to provide housing. So as I mentioned, it makes amendments to the Housing Accountability Act and the Permit Streamlining Act with the purpose of incentivizing development and also streamlining the permit process. The way it tends to incentivize development is this new process whereby applicants can submit for multi-unit housing projects preliminary applications that are required to be prepared by the city and placed on our website that set forth state-mandated information and documents that can be submitted to the city under the preliminary application. Basically, it's a first step. It's not quite a complete application that we would process with regards to approval. It's a conceptual project with some significant detail that we can review with regards to historic resources, where it's located, its size, its unit number, square footage. But the real point of it and the reason it's important is once this preliminary application is submitted to the city and it's complete, it freezes in time or vests the laws and regulations, policies, and even fees that project is going to be subject to. This is a move away from the traditional law for other projects and other building types that traditionally say that a project vests or the laws and regulations become applied to that project when it either its tentative map is approved or it gets a building permit approval. So why this is an incentive for developers is it gives them the opportunity to submit this project, and as it goes through the building permit process and design approval process, they're locked in at that prior design such that if there's a change in the law, it's not going to necessarily impact their project because they're under the old regulations, so they don't have to potentially redesign a project or be subject to additional fees.
I want to interrupt only to underscore that point. The law that Ms. Ostranger is referring to goes back to 1976 when the California Supreme Court said that an applicant for a development project doesn't have a property right protected by the Constitution until they've got a building permit, they pulled in good faith, and they've completed substantial construction. That's very late. So a developer will have expended most of the soft cost money by that point. Lots of money invested in a project. So what this law will probably apply most often in greenfield kinds of communities. Take a Manteca, Turlock, something up in the Delta that has fields. An applicant will come in early with a massive development. Community wakes up 8 months later, runs an initiative to prevent or impose a fee. This law is going to allow those housing developments to avoid getting hit later in the process by an initiative or a council-driven change in the law. So this really, in all candor, it undoes 43 years of California law. as to housing developments.
So yeah, it applies to housing developments as they're defined under the Housing Accountability Act. So multifamily and a mixed use with 2/3, but it's not as incentivizing for developers of the smaller projects, because the projects aren't going to take that long period of time where you could imagine that there's going to be a substantial change in the law. But since we are required to accept them and we are required to have a preliminary application posted on our website, the staff worked very diligently and did that, and it's either posted on the website now or it will be shortly.
Question, Mr. Kwan. So what did you mean by greenfield? So when there's big pieces of land in a...
Madam Mayor, I apologize for the slang. I mean development of previously undeveloped land. So conversion of farmland to housing or conversion of open space to housing. A place like Santa Barbara has few opportunities for big housing developments.
Right. So that's what I thought. Okay. Thanks. Question, Ms. Snedden?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a question I've had long-term, really, and this term deemed complete. And Mr. Klon just mentioned complete in good faith. And we've heard this multiple times in public comment or different places. If there's a rush to turn in applications because a current law says incentivizing building, but that application is erroneous or not in good faith, or how that's determined, how are we defining? It seems to me this definition of deemed complete has sort of changed from the city's perspective over time. And I'm wondering if that's something that's up for interpretation, city interpretation or not, or is that a state deemed complete? What does it mean to be deemed complete?
I want to take a shot at that first, and then Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Snedden, there is a coalescence of two things that we're talking about. The application and the building permit have to be obtained, and the person getting that permit has to be doing so based on true facts, so good faith. It can't be a fraud. There's a second body of law, though, that deals with what happens when the government makes a mistake. So we process an application improperly. And those two bodies of law work against each other. The mistake part of the law used to say pretty clearly that you don't prevent the government from exercising its functions because of the mistake of a public official. So a building that was built too high in the way of the San Diego airport would have to remove a couple of stories, no questions asked. The courts have changed their point of view on that, generally and locally. In my experience, they are less willing to protect the public from the mistakes of public officials, and they are more willing, in a very macro sense, more willing to impose what's called estoppel against the government when we make a mistake. So there are two things working here: the good faith of the applicant, and then if we missed a problem with the application. And sometimes, even if they're in bad faith, if we've made a mistake, the balance doesn't work well for us. So that's the difficult judgment call we make time to time.
And thank you, Mr. Khan. I think my question more is not estoppel against the city, but when is it when someone turns in the application? Is that we had this question with ADUs before? We're going to have this question with AUDs. And I could pick up this question another time, but it seems to be an ongoing question of if I turn in my application, is that the day that it's deemed complete, or is it after it's gone through design review or after concept review, or at what point does this law protect that is the date that it's under?
So if it's a ministerial approval, it would be deemed complete is the date that you're submitting everything that is required by the city. Under this, the amendment to the Housing Accountability Act, as it specifically pertains to preliminary applications, the deemed complete is similar. It's when you've checked, there's actually 17 categories of information with subcategories that needs to be submitted to the city. So if the city accepts it and just checks off the box, yes, 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 this, and we've got it now. Now you're deemed complete. It's still going to go through that process, the development process, the discretionary process, and it will not be deemed complete until it satisfies all of the requirements that we can then apply the Permit Streamlining Act to the project.
So as it's going through that process, it's applying the laws in place on the day that the applicant turned the application in. Okay.
So how it works right now, a project can go to concept design review and go through that project, and then the applicant will say yes, and the board say yes, this project is ready for preliminary design approval, and then that triggers staff. They do a very thorough review, make sure yes, this is complete, and it goes through and it's CEQA, and yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. There's other topics besides land use. I think that's why we're slowing down, because it's one of our topics of interest usually. So let's keep going, please.
Okay, so with regards to talking about the streamlining of the permit process, a significant amendment to the Permit Streamlining Act is now the prohibition that cities have more than 5 hearings to approve a project. So the projects need to get approved in 5 hearings. Just keeping in mind, if it's a project that needs a land use decision as well as design review, that is 1 hearing at Planning Commission and then a preliminary design hearing at a design review board, followed by final. So we're getting to the 3 at that point. Just to be clear, that actually says preliminary application is deemed complete, but its application is deemed complete pursuant to the process that we had talked about earlier.
Okay.
So legislature recognizing that this push for housing is in some ways going to also require a lot of infill redevelopment, has included some tenant protection measures, particularly for the affordable units, what they call protected units in the Housing Crisis Act. So it provides that a city or a county cannot approve a project for redevelopment unless the project will replace at least as many units as are being demolished, and that the developer cannot then has to provide tenant relocation assistance and also the right of first refusal for a comparable unit to a tenant that is displaced. This only applies to protected units. So the only protection offered for tenants that are being displaced if they are not in a protected unit that's being demolished is that the developer has to allow them to reside on the property until at least 6 months prior to construction. For the purposes of the Housing Crisis Act, a protected unit is a unit that has a recorded affordability covenant at a lower income or very low income within the last 5 years, is subject to some city rent restriction or price control, or that the unit has been occupied within the last 5 years by households at the lower or very low income level. So that summarizes that portion, and that ends the legislation portion. If you don't have any questions, I can turn it over to public safety.
I don't see any lights, so we'll move on to public safety.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm going to try and be very quick.
with the next 4 slides so we can get to the more interesting part of the presentation. The first bill that I'm going to be talking about is AB 72, which is part of the budget bill. The key takeaway here is there's $20 million of grant funding that's available through Cal OES for community-based organizations and local entities for information to and what's the best term? Resources for vulnerable members of the community. I talked to the fire chief about the ability of the city of Santa Barbara to qualify for some of this grant money. He says because of our particular location, experience, and demographics, we do have a good opportunity to potentially get some of this $20 million. The next bill is AB 836. This again relates to wildfires, and it basically is a new initiative. It creates the Wildfire Smoke Clean Air Centers for Vulnerable Population Incentive Pilot Program. And the purpose is to basically create some safe community centers where vulnerable individuals and communities can go and be safe from the air pollution that frequently accompanies wildfires. Again, this will be developing criteria through the State Air Resources Board for these grants, and primarily what it does is it creates funding opportunities to retrofit community centers, schools, libraries, and other major gathering points. Again, I talked to the fire chief, indicated that the city, because of its demographics and experience, has the potential for getting money from this grant funding opportunity. The next one is extremely important for dog and cat lovers who don't have access to their own transportation, and this is a bill that establishes new criteria to allow for the evacuation of pets, and pets means dogs and cats, it doesn't mean pigs and parrots, to be able to evacuate those using public transportation consistent with public safety. And so the best management practices that will be developed under this bill will balance the needs of the community to remove their pets, but also assure public safety. The last bill that I'm going to be talking about under this section is SB 560. This again relates to the wildfire protocols for electric utilities for shutoffs. It establishes additional criteria. The key takeaway here is that it requires facilities-based mobile telephony providers, cellular providers, to receive information and disseminate information to key organizations so that information relating to shutoffs can get out to organizations, particularly our public safety folks. And so with that, I'm going to stop, and unless there's any questions, we'll be handing it, I believe, to Assistant City Attorney City Prosecutor, excuse me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good news. My part is only 4 slides, but I'm happy to answer any questions. The first one is Senate Bill 923. It's a new law enacted. It's Penal Code Section 859.7. It affects police lineups and photo lineups. It requires the adoption of a policy, a blind administrator. When possible, there should be video and audio recording. So it's meant to protect the integrity of a photo lineup. So it's a new requirement for the police department. Also, the DA's office would have to comply with it. They have a DA investigators. If they do photo lineups, they are also subject to this new law. The second one is Senate Bill 55, lifetime gun possession ban for people who are placed on what's known as 5150 holds or mental health holds, 72-hour holds. If you have 2 in 1 year, then you're banned from possessing firearms for life. But it's 2 in 1 year, so that's a lot in a 1 year period of time. The third one is AB 1747. It protects the CLUTCH system, which is the California Law Enforcement Telecommunications System. The police uses that system to get people's rap sheet and criminal history. So that is being protected now and can't be used for immigration enforcement purposes. And it begins beginning July 21st, 2021. Certain requirements are
certain things are required for you to access it. You have to report certain things when you're accessing that information. And then the last one for me is Assembly Bill 1618. It's a plea bargain limitations, plea bargain protection. It prevents prosecutors from offering a deal to criminal defendants to require them to waive any rights to any privileges for any changes in law. So, for example, if later on someone enters into a plea agreement for a crime, and later on the legislature deems that crime to be less serious, from a felony to a misdemeanor, the prosecutor can't at the plea deal say, hey, you can't take advantage of any future changes in law. You're stuck with the felony. So this bill prevents that from taking place. Thank you all.
Thanks.
The next bill is AB 61. This is an expansion of a bill brought by Hannah Beth Jackson after the Isla Vista shooting, which allows gun violence restraining orders, which can last up to a year. Doesn't mean if a person has to be charged with a crime if they are a significant danger to themselves or others. Current law now allows law enforcement agencies or family members to obtain one. Our office has in the past. Now expands to employers, schools, meaning that they can get one on behalf of an employee that poses a danger to the workplace. SB 230 is a use of force policy. Our use of force policy is already posted online. We did that as of January 1st as a requirement of a previous bill, SB 78. And what this does is requires departments to have use of force policies for practices and procedures and reporting requirements. We're pretty much in compliance with this bill already. It becomes effective 2021. The main issue with this also has to do with how some of the policies can be used. It can be used in court as evidence to see if the officer acted reasonable, but cannot be used as the officer requiring to have a duty under law. So it's a separation between the two. And AB 1600 in regard to pitches motions. Pitches motions are the mechanism or procedure under the evidence code that people are able to get information out of a officer's personnel files. They can be filed in both criminal or civil court. This just reduces the time from 16 days to 10 days notice to file a responsive pleading for that. I'm going to quickly shift to public records. There's just one bill dealing with that that we figured would bring to everyone's attention. AB 1819 allows people to make copies of public records via their cell phone, or they can bring a device, copy machine to do so. However, there are restrictions. They can't access computer systems to do so. They cannot damage or touch the document. One of the interesting things the bill does not mention, but is architectural drawings or building plans are prohibited. There's a process for that, right? You have to have, you cannot make immediate copies. You need the architect's permission, for example, to make copies so that you can review them. The bill doesn't address that ability, but as I interpret that law, that no one can still make copies of these, take a cell phone and make architectural building plan copies, their first inspection on that. And labor relations is very light in terms of what would pertain to the city. I do want to highlight the main bill that everyone's been talking about, AB 5. This comes from a California Supreme Court case, how we classify independent contractors versus employees. It now expands a ABC test, as you see up there, in terms of what is required. The person must be free from control and direction of the employer or the organization, performs work that's usually outside the course of the hiring entity's business, and is engaged independently in an established trade. What this requires for us is to review our contracts to make sure that we aren't creating employees. The other issue potentially is a PERS issue. If we have an independent contractor and are they employed, are we on the hook for PERS? Fortunately, PERS follows the common law employee test, which is a distinction from this. It's a little more stringent mechanism. So
I don't think it'll really be a problem in terms of being on the hook for purchasable pensions for people who we engage in contracts with. And with that, I'll turn it to Mr. Henschke, Assistant City Attorney Henschke for Finance.
Thank you.
Hello again, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. There's one bill that I want to talk about under the finance area. I always love talking about how the city gets money. I think it's a good thing. This is the Internet Sales Tax Bill, and basically what it does is it implements in California the Supreme Court's landmark decision in South Dakota versus Wayfair. And that decision was really important because it shifted from a physical presence nexus for sales and use tax to an economic nexus, and essentially an economic test. And so what this bill basically does is it sets the economic nexus for doing business in California subject to taxation to $500,000 a year in combined sales. And importantly, what this bill also does is it requires the major large market facilitators, Amazon, eBay, the other major internet vendors, to collect and distribute to the states, or the state of California at least, the sales tax associated with internet sales on its platforms. This doesn't require any action on the part of the city, but what it does, we anticipate seeing an increase of between 1.8 to 3.5% in our sales tax revenues. How much actually remains to be seen. That's based upon a statewide projection that was conducted by Michael Coleman out of the League of California Cities. The next set of bills relates to public works. The first bill, AB 1768, essentially is a clarification of what something means to be a public work for the purpose of payment of prevailing wage. The main issue here has to do with preliminary site assessments and feasibility studies. Those types of activities are now clearly defined as part of public work for the payment of prevailing wage. And it doesn't matter if the construction, the final construction actually occurs. The construction of a project includes the preliminary work, even if you don't proceed any further than that. This won't have a significant impact on the city, but it does expand the payment of prevailing wage. The next bill, AB 456, simply extends the existing claim resolution process that the city is required to follow. It's by state statute. It's included on our construction contracts. It extends that dispute resolution process another 7 years. Actually, that dispute resolution process works pretty well. You had a matter on your consent calendar today that resulted in a change order that went through this claim resolution process, and we got a successful result. The next piece of legislation is the further activities of the state, AB 1180, related to trying to maximize the state's water resources. We've done that here in Santa Barbara through One Water, down at Estero, but I had to get that plug in for you. But what this bill does is it requires incorporation in the standards for backflow prevention and cross connections, a switchover valve that allows the use of potable water in dual plumbed water systems when recycled water is not available. Why does that happen? Well, it encourages the use of recycled water when you've got facilities in a building that need to be potentially switched over. You don't want to have, those could be essential facilities like toilets. You want to be able to have water in them, even though they might be recycled water during a time when recycled water is not available. It encourages the use of recycled water to have that kind of switchover capability. So that's what that's all about. SB 200, this was actually a very significant fight that has been going on at the state level for a couple of years over what is the statewide water tax. And so through the efforts of cities, water districts, our advocacy groups, including the League and Aqua, were successful in getting the idea of a water tax put aside. It's no longer a possibility, but we still have the real, very significant issue about the ability to provide safe drinking water to disadvantaged communities in California. How did that get solved? Well, it didn't get solved by a water tax. How it got solved was creating this affordable drinking water fund and actually funding it out of the greenhouse gas relief fund, registration fund or something like that. But this is a significant action by the legislature to actually fund safe drinking water for disadvantaged communities, not establish a water tax, and to fund it out of another funding source that is available for this purpose. Next legislation, SB 646, the upshot of this is that the definition of fee for the purposes of connection charges is changed. The new language is basically straight out of the Constitution, Prop 26, defining what a fair and reasonable relationship is for a fee. The reason I put this in here actually is that it's not so much of the law change. It does restrict our ability to set our connection fees now, but it's a really good example of bad legislative drafting and why it's really a bad idea to put substantive limitations into a definition. When you read the bill, it is very difficult to actually understand what it says. And I make this because the first part of the bill, of the definition, defines what fee is by talking about something that's charged for connecting of facilities. The second part adds to the definition by having a substantive limitation on the amount of the fee, and you read it and you're trying to figure out actually what is being said. We actually tried to get the legislature to fix that, separate it out, and to do good drafting, but they decided no. The realtors were for this, the Howard Jarvis taxpayers were for this, so therefore we're for it, and now we're stuck with a new definition that we think we know what it means. We'll be able to give you advice as to how to set your fees and charges, but I always like putting out what the legislature did wrong. The other thing I wanted to mention, there's not a slide. I want to go back to slide 13, SB 13 on slide 20. There was a discussion there about impact fees on ADUs and the limitation on those. One thing I wanted to point out, we were very successful in making sure that impact fees for the purposes of ADUs does not include the connection charge and capacity fee for water. Those are not impact fees. Impact fees are different. Those are fees for actually, physical connections or actual water service. And so we will be able to continue to collect our capacity charges and connection fees in an appropriate manner when appropriate on ADUs. Sometimes they don't impact the system because they don't increase the connected requirement, but that was an important limitation that we were able to get into the law in SB 13. The next bill has to do with transportation. This is a new law that allows or directs Caltrans to develop standards for striping, lane striping, and signage so that bicyclists will be able to go straight through a designated turn lane. For example, a designated right turn lane. If you're a bicyclist, you know that you'd like to ride oftentimes as far as you can to the right. Sometimes that you end up in a mandatory turn lane. This will allow cyclists through properly designated lanes to go straight through those designated turn lanes. That's it's to enhance the safety of cycling and to address those issues. We're moving on to the housing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you going to do the housing?
I'll take the housing.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Mr. Henschke.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, very quickly, this is really a segue to a discussion of a bill that is not in your report that I've previously given the council a report on. That's AB 1482. That was the statewide rent control and just cause eviction law. That will be coming to you on February 11th. For detailed discussion. There are 3 bills here that I want to mention. AB 1110 is a kind of a companion to the rent control law, and it says basically that if you're outside of that rent control, large rent increases, 10% or more, take a 90-day notice, which is substantially longer than existing law. Next slide, AB 1497. This may be useful to us in our city enforcement efforts. It basically requires the vacation rental hosting platforms to run non-discriminatory services. It'll be interesting to see how they react to that. There is widespread speculation that there is rampant discrimination in short-term vacation rental operations. Lastly, SB 329, I believe, reinforces existing law and says that you can't discriminate against a tenant, deny them a housing opportunity because they're using a Section 8 voucher as their source of funding or income. Those are all of our comments. Happy to answer any questions. We thought it was fun. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'd want to go back to where the person has to be a qualified elector. Maybe I should have jumped in right at the beginning, because I was like right at the beginning. So we would have to do a charter amendment asking our voters to say it's okay. Was that to appoint them to boards and commissions? So Mr. Kalan, what if we put it on the ballot and they said no? What do we do then?
Well, I think there's a serious preemption question, and I alluded to it talking about the Voting Rights Act and then even year elections. The issue here is there a statewide concern important enough to tell the city of Santa Barbara the qualifications for its board and commission members? And you can also ask whether citizenship, the requirement that's eliminated by that law, is relevant to being on a board and commission. Because the charter is explicit in saying you have to be a qualified elector, an elector is a person who can vote, so right. That implies citizen, or not implies, that includes citizenship. Right. Because the charter says that specifically, we wanted to highlight that if you want to change it, you'll need to go to the voters. And you have the opportunity to do that. You may recall that when we were talking about special elections versus appointment a few years ago, I had flexibility to interpret the charter to give you room to make a decision to conduct an election rather than make an appointment, because the charter language didn't address district elections specifically. We don't have that here, so we're kind of stuck with what the charter says unless and until the voters or you ask the voters to change it.
Okay, so maybe the next time we have an election, we can take up that question if it's deemed appropriate. Ms. Ostringer, how many large family daycare homes do we have in the city? And I guess if you have that number, you can email me. I'm just wondering if that particular law is going to affect us a lot, or...
I can tell you there was actually our current ordinances that we have now was actually not in compliance with the even prior law, so we weren't really enforcing it in the way that we should have been or could be. So I think that's also one of the reasons why, but we could check to see how many we have.
Okay, and then you were the one that was talking about SB 330 and that you had a PowerPoint that you had presented to the Planning Commission?
Mayor Murillo, yes.
I would like to see it. If you wanted to send it to the rest of us, that would be good.
Madam Mayor, I actually encourage Ms. Ostringer to get it posted to the city's website, but it's far longer than what we could accommodate today, although I know it's fascinating.
The public should have
material.
access to it too. Thank you very much for that. And then Mr. Henschke on AB 147, that was good news, right? We'll get some of that sales tax? Yes. Okay, he's saying yes for the record. Okay, you were just away from the microphone. So Mr. Jordan and then Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Clun, so what's the best way or the easiest way to have a conversation about, I have a copy of the city charter right there because it isn't that long, but the protections afforded by the city charter compared to all the housing legislation. Is that something you'll bring in the future? Is that something to come see you and go have coffee to get up to speed?
I think the easiest thing would be for me to prepare a report on the preemption doctrine, how it works, to get everybody up to speed. And some of it's a little technical legally, a lot of it isn't. So I'd like a chance to write you a report. If that's what the council would like, I'd be happy to do it.
Okay, so I'll not be the one who asks you to do more work. I
No,
will let the rest of us digest
Already
that.
creating more work.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Fried-
Because I find that that's still, a problem with that report is it really doesn't cast an opinion on do we need to raise heck over 33 extra feet because we can, or is it just a waste of time and we have to try and figure out a way to manipulate through the cracks of it, or are there other ones that we can just say, nah, we don't think so, we don't qualify?
Madam Mayor, if I might, Councilmember Jordan, your judgment is, in the first instance, more important than the courts. The issue is what's the difference between a municipal affair that you can control and a statewide concern. So I've given you those words so you can play with them. To be intellectually honest, the courts use those words and then make a judgment call based on those. So,
Mr. Friedman.
Well, I'll be the one to take one for the team, Mr. Jordan, and I'll ask you to do more work, Mr. Cologne. Assuming everybody else agrees, 'cause I can't do that on my own. But I think it's a great idea to understand that, especially in light of that. Especially in light of that bill itself may or may not be implemented, but if I know and been reading the legislature, they might revise that bill to make it even more plausible that something could go through much easier to that extent. So it'd be good to really understand on that. Just two quick comments. First, I want to thank Mr. Henschke for your humor today. I really enjoyed it, making a little get through this dry stuff. So I appreciated your dry humor on these subjects. So, but also want to thank staff for these excellent reports. You put a lot of work into this and effort. It really helps us as we go into the year. And I would like to see this, if we can do something like this every January, based on if there's a significant number of bills that we need to do. If there's a year where they don't have 826 bills or whatever it is, but if there is significant bills, I think this is a great way to start the year. So that's all my comments, and thank you to a job well done and very informative.
Any other questions or comments from the council? No, I don't see any lights. So thank you all very much. We'll close this item with thanks. And we'll go on to committee assignment reports. We've been on break for a long time. Go ahead, Ms. Snedden, and then Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended the final Creeks committee meeting of the year, but there was no quorum, so we had a nice bench-side chat about the year. At Water Commission, many issues that will be coming forward to council about our water portfolio, but we also honored the service of Commissioner Jordan as he stepped down from Water Commission. We had our first farmers market subcommittee meeting, just discussing the roles and getting the conversation started and really emphasizing the goodwill of the city toward the farmers market and seeing their success. I also attended the illumination ceremony at the Mission on the winter solstice. Former Mayor Helene Schneider had told me about that, and it was a really remarkable event and something I didn't know about our missions, that they're on that illumination day, the sun rises and it reflects off the ocean and then into the urn, and then the whole altar lights up and sparkles. And it was I'd really recommend that members of the community attend that really sort of non-denominational event celebrating the solstice. And that's all.
Thanks. Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Last night I attended the Youth Council meeting where they talked about their anti-vaping event that they're planning for next month.
Anti-vaping, did you say?
Anti-vaping, yeah. And they also talked about volunteering for the Martin Luther King rally and parade, or not parade, sorry, march. That's going to happen, I believe, this month. Yeah. So that's all.
Thank you. I attended the SBCAG and APCD meetings, Santa Barbara County Association of Governments and Air Pollution Control District, but I'll make a more full report next week. I just don't have the agendas in front of me. Mr. Friedman?
I, too, attended the Farmers Market Subcommittee and also the Arts Advisory Committee. We had just a holiday kind of celebration, and we're sent off Nathan Vonk. And I want to thank him for his 2 terms of extraordinary service to the Arts Advisory Committee and all that he has contributed over the past 8 years.
Very good. And that closes our committee assignment reports. We'll adjourn this meeting, and we're back at it next Tuesday. We're adjourned.